Howdy, everybody. I am J.R. Sparrow, the host of West Virginia Uncommonplace. Sometimes I'm the host, or actually, I'm a co host of Sparrows Under Review, which you can check out every Tuesday. Today, I am very delighted. And when I say delighted, when I say that, then it's got to be something that's from my realm. I have with me Tina Davidson. And Tina, the nostalgic question that we always ask people are who are you and why are you here? So before we get to that, this is what I want you to do for the audience. Please tell them something because we know your name already because I said it. Tell us something that no one knows about you.
Oh my goodness. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I am so delighted. Something that no one knows about me. Oh boy, I'm pretty open about my life. I was thinking that I love to garden. Oh, lately, you know what? I love to swim. Uh, I've been doing a lot of exercise in the pool, and I feel like it's this double, not only are you immersed in this wonderful fluid that kind of lifts you up and surrounds you, but I always feel like it's massaging me. So I guess that might be something. Well,
Okay.
some people know.
Okay. Now, here we go. You wrote a memoir, Let Your Heart Be Broken. And before we get into the question that I'm asking, because the normal question is just very generic, is what inspired you to share your personal journey? Please tell everybody a little bit about your life, real quick, if you don't mind.
Yes, I'd be delighted. So I am a classical composer. So I write music out of a classical tradition. You wouldn't say it sounds like Beethoven or Bach or any of those composers, but it's out of that tradition, just the way you might write a piece of jazz that's out of the tradition, but it doesn't sound like Coltrane, etc.
Okay.
Um, and I've been doing that for over 45 years.
Wow.
So I was a pianist when I started learning to play the piano when I was 5. Um, my mother used to sort of bribe me to practice by giving me 5 cents an hour. That doesn't seem like a lot, does it? And then she upped it to 10 cents an hour. So, and when I was younger, kids didn't have as many distractions. We didn't have television at that point. I read all the time. I hung out with my other brothers and sisters, and I practiced. So I was a very good pianist by the time I went to college.
Okay.
And in college, they said, well, you have to compose music. And I said, ridiculous. That's nonsense. And when I started to write music, it really grabbed my attention. I suddenly had to do it. It was as if I could speak about my life. I could examine my life, but it was very private because music doesn't, you can't hear a piece and say, oh, did you have trouble with your mother? Because you wouldn't know that. So it had a kind of wonderful privacy and anonymity about it. And I love that. And I really wanted to know more about myself, and not in an egotistical way, but sort of like I always felt that I was the petri dish. I was the place that you experimented on. And if I understood myself, I would start to understand my connection with the world and with my community better. So I always had that perspective that I was sort of writing autobiographies all the time through my music.
Okay.
And about 10 years ago, I decided I really wanted to put language, words behind not only my life story, which has its ups and downs, but also how I write music, how I relate to music. What does it do for me? And that's why I wrote Let Your Heart Be Broken, and it's subtitled Life and Music from a Classical Composer.
Okay. And let's do something real quick that's nostalgic about the show. We have this thing called the shameless plug. And the shameless plug, we basically, it's real simple. And I know it's very generic, but we do that so that people can know where to meet and greet you across the internet and where they can grab that amazing book.
Oh my goodness. So Tina Davidson is my name, and that's the name of my website, tinadavidson.com. And the book is sold on Amazon. It's very easy to get. And I have recordings, and my music is on all the audio platforms like Spotify and Apple Music. And places that I don't even know about. People say, "Oh, I heard your music on, I don't know," and I'll go, "Oh, cool."
And audience, one thing that she forgot to tell you all is one other thing I want you all to think about this. Go to your local library also. Definitely buy the book from her on Amazon, but go to your local library and ask for the book to be put into your library if you're in your state capital. If you do it in your state capital across anywhere in the United States, they will provide that book for every county in that state. So
Oh,
that's a
wow.
life hack, and that's Amazon's
Ah,
cheater. That's Amazon's cheater way to get people to be in bestsellers
I
because
I had no idea. Great
well,
hint. Thank you.
remember, we learned this in school. Think about it.
Mhm.
When we were in school and we did that, when we were learning about the library system and all that stuff, they said, if there's a book here that you didn't want, I mean, not that you didn't want that isn't here, we can get it for you. You just have to request it and get the ISBN number. And we learned that, and me and you both learned that somewhere in school. I don't know what year for you, but me, it was like third grade. And it's something that I always think about. I'm like, why don't PR firms and people
Yes.
that are helping people, Amazon does this and makes people bestsellers, but we won't
Oh,
talk about that right now.
yeah.
So, all right. So, thank you for telling us about your book. So, how have love, forgiveness, and creativity influenced your music over the years?
That's a good question. I'm going to back up a little bit and say that I had a very sort of unusual childhood. I was
Okay.
born in Sweden and I was placed in a foster home. And I lived in this foster home, in this Swedish foster home, as a little Swedish girl. I spoke Swedish, and my brothers were Swedish, my mother and father were Swedish. And of course, I was so young, I didn't know that I was a foster child. And one day, this beautiful American woman came and adopted me and brought me back to the States. And then I grew up as being the oldest of of five. She had four children, and she was a professor.
Okay.
When I was 21, I decided that I was going to go back to Sweden. I had a job in Sweden, and I thought, oh, I'm going to find out who my parents were. Not that being adopted was a problem. I always felt wanted in my family, but I always felt different. I didn't feel like, when they told stories of, your grandfather did this or did that, I go, oh, that is so cool. Oh, that's not my grandfather. So I always knew in the back of my head that I I wanted to be able to reach out and touch my my lineage, my background, the whole story. I wanted the whole story. I just didn't want the story that was in front of me, but the whole story. So I went back to Sweden and they said, oh, come in. We have some information for you. And I was sitting there and she's reading this letter. And she says, your adopted mother, the woman who adopted you, is your birth mother.
Whoa.
Um, and it was as if I didn't even know who I was anymore, because I had had this huge longing to belong. And here I was actually belonging. It's almost like my story, the words were rewritten. You still have the
Yes.
same picture, the motion picture is still the same, but the words are suddenly different. And so you're asking me about love and forgiveness. This was something that really was very hard for me. I suffered as a child a great deal of depression. What I hadn't realized is that when I walked away from my foster family, I lost my family. They were my family. It was as if there was a terrible car accident and they were wiped off the face of this earth. And because my mother had been so reluctant and refused to talk about the fact that she was my birth mother and had told no one, it had not even told her husband, my stepfather, I had no place to go with that. And I found out that a lot of my depression was about that grief, that loss. So, where music was so important for me is, since I was always writing about myself, when I started to understand how deep this sadness was for me, I started to compose music about it. And I think that helped me unravel. It's not a perfect system. It's not like you go to therapy and you're fixed, or you do this and you're fixed, or you write music and you're fix, but all these little pieces can help. And so it's been quite a long journey for finding love. I think that's finding that my foster mother always loved me and that love always stood beside me, even though I never saw her again. Forgiveness, being able to really forgive my mother for having made these kinds of choices, which made sense in the 50s. You know, having a child out of wedlock was frowned upon. She was a young teacher or professor at university. She probably wouldn't have been able to do that. But all those things and music helping me express myself and sort of get it out, you know, be able to see it, I think is more of an answer for your question.
And I like that for the simple fact right there, you were able to deal with something because, people always get hurt by trauma, and some people just get bitter and don't find a way to resonate or, resonate something good out of it. And you resonated something good out of this. And when I was reading over everything before you came on the show, I am a symphonic band player. My
Oh,
sister, no, I played trombone. Now, my sister went on to be in a symphonic band. She was first chair, piccolo, flute.
mhm.
She played every woodwind instrument, but knew how to play every instrument in the band. Then she went on to be in the marching band. So I have a musical background, and I learned how to read music at a young age. And knowing that you could write compositions, that was so amazing to me. I wanted to give you your
Mhm.
chops and give you your praise on that, because writing any type of music, and especially which I call symphonic music, but that type of music that you write, it takes a skill. It is something that I will tell you that I don't think is manufactured. I think it has to come from a place. And you just telling us that, we know where this come from.
Yeah.
To me, from my observation or from what I listened to, I can tell that you were probably hurt after you did this full round circle. But
Mhm.
over time, you did something that a lot of people can't do. You decided to have a resolve. And for that, I want to tell you thank you.
Oh, and let me tell you the book, Let Your Heart Be Broken. The I have a quote in there from somebody that I was listening to, and he said he thought the meaning of life was to let your heart be broken. And I thought, what the heck? That doesn't sound smart. But the truth is our hearts are broken. Our hearts are broken all the time in many, many different ways. You know, whether it is, you know, actually heartbreak with somebody that you love and have lost, or a death, or trauma, or maybe it's as simple as your children grow up and you have an empty nest, you know, and you're feeling a heartbreak of that discontinuity. And my feeling is march towards that heartbreak. Don't hide it in your backyard. Don't sit on it. Because from my experience is that there has been so much rich earth in the bottom of the well of heartbreak. There's this delicious earth that is ready. It's there for you to start again or make your peace or move on or whatever you need to do. So I think, you know, readers have really loved this book because it speaks on so many different levels. It speaks about being a child and having that trauma. It speaks about being an older adult and starting to deal with it. And then it has this constant current of this is what I'm composing now, and this is how I'm doing it. So it talks a lot about the composition process or my composition process, and what I find meaningful and what I look for when I write music.
Okay, okay. And to tie all this together again, I want to say that after you did all that explanation, you're amazing at doing that. You should get into storytelling. You might want to start a podcast or just do like some kind of audio thing with what you got going on. So, memoir to music. When you're composing this book, because we're going to go into a different spectrum real quick, if you don't mind. And this is about the author portion, because we used to do a show
Mhm.
called Author Circle. It was like one of our subgenres. So I want to ask you some book related things
Yes.
or some author related questions. I just put book in there because it was just what rolled off my tongue. So the music and the memoirs, did you have to take certain songs that you have composed and kind of go back in your mind, like just close your eyes and just visualize real quick? What was going on when I was composing this? What was the atmosphere like? What year was it? What did I solve by making this, or what did I enhance by making this? Did you have any of that? I had to close my eyes on that. I was visualizing. Um,
You know, fortunately for me, I have always written a journal. And
okay,
it became part of my composing process. So I have a journal back in I started in 1967 when I was a teenager, and I was writing in purple ink about my girlfriends and how they were not very nice to me. So I have those journals, but off and on, even through college and as a young, excuse me, adult, I would journal. And I think it was really in my 30s that I really started to journal as part of my composing process. So
okay,
I didn't write so much about the weather. Sometimes I wrote about the weather or what I was doing, but I would write about what I was thinking. I would write about what I was composing. Sometimes I'd write about, how I was handling something with my daughter or with my husband. And so I have, you know, tons of these journals. I mean, I would write probably a half an hour to an hour every day that I was composing, so 5 days a week. And I just had all this information, um, concerts that I had seen, performers that I loved, performers that I was working with. So I had a huge amount of reference material. And I used a lot of that, not a lot of it. Actually, I used probably no more than 10% of it because, I left out all the complaining and I'm so angry at her. I could just, if words could, hurt people, man, the words would come out of my head and, if only, so all this blah, 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 the blah, blah, blah that we all have. And I just took the things that I thought other people would be interested in or really spoke to something I was composing about. And a lot of times I would write something on day one and then I would write more about it on day three. And then maybe the next week I'd write about it again. And then I'd put those together. I did a lot
okay.
of editing. Um, so I used a lot of that. So I didn't really have to reconstruct
And
a
that's
lot
amazing.
of, yeah. And I have a composing journal, I have a personal journal, and sometimes I have a spiritual journal. It depends. Sometimes, and that includes what I'm reading, etc. And that had become a very important part of my music after I really wrote about 10 years about my own life. Like, for instance, I have a piece for four cellos called Dark Child Sings, and it's about that dark child in me, that hurt child. Um, but after I started writing a lot of that music, after about 10 years, I started thinking, oh, I wonder how I connect with the outside world. How do I connect with nature or with the earth or with the great spirit or with God or with whatever is out there. And so I've been writing about 20 years about that personal connection. I have a piece that was actually recorded twice called Blue Curve of the Earth. And it's about that beautiful blue curve of the earth that we see from the moon, and our love of the earth. Um, so I think now my music is a little bit more personal, about little personal things. So I have a new piece called Hum, Hum, and it's for cello and piano. And it's really about that people used to hum all the time. They didn't listen to music. They kind of made their own music as they were walking or doing the dishes. And it's it's not, you wouldn't listen to the piece and say, oh, she's writing about humming. But that was sort of the image that I was holding in my head as I was composing the music.
Okay, okay, understand that. So now let me ask you, this is a deep, dark question that goes in, and then we'll go into another segment. Now you went over every emotion while you were talking, and I appreciate that. But there's one thing I've written a book myself, and at some period when I wrote my book, and I don't know this if this happened to you, but I do want to ask this: was there a point that you got toxic or had some type of toxicity come about while you were writing this? Like
Ooh,
something Like something that came to mind, like that was harsh that you, it's not that you put it in your memories museum, but you had kind of pushed it back far in there. And it was something that just came up and it was sharp and it kind of put a little hurt in you and you had to fix that.
You mean like as I was writing it and remembering my life?
Yes,
Um,
ma'am.
yeah, well, yes, of course, of course. Now, this is a memoir. I was extremely careful not to talk about my daughter, for instance. She's in there, but she's more as this little figure that walks in and out of the room. But I didn't want to reveal anything about her, any issues of hers. I was very careful about her father, who I actually divorced. And so actually I had sent him a couple copies of a couple drafts and said, what do you think about the way I talk about you? How do you feel? Because I don't want to hurt, this to me, I don't really want to say anything negative about people who are living and would get hurt or feel humiliated. I don't think that's what you're talking about. I think so much of my life has dealt with dealing with things that there are lots of things that I have already processed. When I think about writing a new book, which would be more about as I'm getting older and what's the creative life of somebody who's 60 and over. I think there are things that do come up, and I think, oh my gosh, it's sort of like you touch a memory and it goes, oh, you go, oh, I don't, oh, that's going to be painful. That's bringing up some emotion. That's bringing up some anger. And sometimes, you have to decide if it's worth it to go back and clean that up, or I don't think everything in your life has to be cleaned up.
Yes, ma'am.
I think after you do a lot of your childhood stuff and get that in pretty good working order, I don't know if some of the adult stuff, when you're 30s and 40s, has to be cleaned up. But if it's in my way, if I'm thinking about it, if I'm ruminating about it, if it sparks a lot of anger, yeah, then it's probably a good thing to clean that up. So I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Okay. Okay. Now, I pay homage to a news magazine and it's called 2020. As a young man, I'm 38 years old now. John Stossel would come on the show, and John Stossel was comedic relief. Diane Sawyer, she would come on the show, and she was poignant with her interviews. And someone I forgot about, Elizabeth Vargas. She was another person. She's still on there, and I've been doing this little bit for a while, and I just started mentioning her about 2 weeks ago. And then there was someone else, and there was this lady that marveled me and made me, her and Larry King, but her, the late great Barbara Walters. They made me want to interview people. They made me want to do exactly what I want to do here, because Barbara Walters had two types to her. If she did a really good interview, it usually started about 20 minutes to 11, or maybe sometimes 10 minutes till. And if she did a really good interview, the news broadcast would let her go over until 11:05. And if it was something that was mediocre, or if it was just something that was subpar, they cut her off before 11 o'clock or at 11 o'clock. We went on and watched the news, or in my case, I went to sleep, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So, Tina, are you ready to get on this hot seat and do these 2020 or answer these 2020 questions?
Sure. Why not? This sounds fun.
Okay, so our first question is the fun question. That's the John Stossel one. So, writing a book, being
Oh, you've got to do the voice. You've got to do the voice.
do the
Yes,
voice.
oh, yes. And did you really mean that?
Well, so here's the first question. So balance. And John Stossel, if you do go back and check him out in archives, he always talked to me about a certain balance. He didn't use the word balance, but he did ask about balance. So balance, being a parent, being a person with multiple titles to your name.
Right.
What glass did you have to fill more than the other?
Oh, this is such a hard question about being parents. And I think it's particularly in the realm of parenting. And it might be also if in terms of being a spouse as well. But I was just on a panel in New York in January, and it was about being an artist and being a parent. And these were women artists, these were great pianists. And it is such a dance. As every parent knows who's working, when there's a snow day, you think you're going to go crazy because suddenly, you have to find somebody to take care of your child, or you have to not go to work, or you have to do something. It's very stressful. So I think when you're an artist, you have to be honest that the work that you're doing is about self. It's about self-exploration. It's about exploring the self in community or in the world. Being a parent is about not having self. It's about serving a child, taking care of those needs, being there 100%. And so how do you balance those? And I always say, don't get them too close. I think particularly for women, then they feel so much conflict. No, acknowledge that the work you're going to do has to be private, it has to be quiet, it has to be away from the family, and you're going to have to not always be able to be perhaps the parent that you want to be. On the other hand, you're not always going to be able to be the artist you want to be. So, and it's not forever. I think that most artists consider themselves as being in a lifetime profession. So, 20 years to give to a child is not the entire length of your career. But it is, I think, making sure that you have 4 or 5 hours of dedicated quiet time away from your child is a must. And I always felt that if I had that amount of time away from my child, I was a really good parent. If I didn't have that, I was very stressed out as a parent. There is always going to be times when you're distracted by your work, or if you're at your work and you're distracted by your child. When my daughter was young, the babysitter would pick her up and go to the adjoining house. We lived in a duplex, so we had a common wall. And I was still nursing at that point. And every once in a while, I could hear my daughter cry from the other side of the wall. And it was just this moment, should I go over or should I stay at work? Should I go, and then, she would stop crying. And then I knew it was okay. It's going to be hard. And I don't think it's about filling one glass more than the other. I think neither glass is completely full if you're going to be a parent. And you're going to have to make a lot of negotiations and a lot of trading. And it might mean that you don't have a social life for 20 years. There's going to be something that you give up. So I gave up social life. I didn't have a social life, but that was sort of okay because I had, you certainly can't do everything when you have a kid. That's all there is to it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that one. Now, the Diane Sawyer question. I want to name a person's name. This person you've had interactions with, they may have even influenced your artistic direction in certain areas. Ernest Hemingway.
Oh, you would. So, when my mother and stepfather got married, I was 5 years old, and we drove down to Key West, and they got married. And they were very young professors, and they were thinking of projects that they wanted to do. And they said, oh, let's interview and photograph famous authors and write a book about it. And who was the closest to them in Cuba, no less, but Ernest Hemingway. So we flew over. It was Christmas Day. And it's actually just before Christmas. And somehow my stepfather got his telephone number. Can you imagine? Here's Ernest Hemingway's telephone number. Called him up and said, we're young professors. Can we come and interview? And he said, yes, come tomorrow, which was Christmas Day. So we We walked out to his villa, and I write about this in his book. And he was a very grumpy man because his stove had stopped working and he was in charge of cooking the Christmas turkey.
Oh Lord.
So I don't remember him that well. I remember the house. I remember he had a, a very large gate in front of his house. And I apparently sat on my mother's lap in the kitchen while he was grumbling. But they interviewed him and they have beautiful, beautiful pictures of him. And very sadly, 4 years later, he committed suicide. So,
Yeah, one of the major tragedies
yes,
in our American history. Yeah.
I think he suffered a great deal, you know.
Yeah, and that's a lot in any type of artistic and content creation, fashion. And we always relate that back to you can relate it to him, but I can always relate it to later on in life about Robin Williams.
Mhm,
He is one in Anthony Bourdain in that
mhm.
area, but that's not what we're here for. We may
Yes.
have to get on another
Anyway, so
type of
that is my relationship with, and they went on to interview, and I met many authors, but I was very little. Yeah.
But Ernest Hemingway, that one just
Ernest
stuck out.
Hemingway, that was a good one. That was a good one.
Yeah. Now the last thing that we're going to do, and this is Barbara Walters, so we're about to get real personal. So accomplishments, accolades, all these things have one word that are synonymous with them, and that word is success. Success is something that I always ask people about that are in your position because you have gained a success that you may not believe, but people like me can see that you attained something that I haven't attained. I may never attain. I mean, I'll attain whatever success I need to in my
Yes.
ecosystem, but my definition of success is this: it's the marginal change that happened from yesterday to today. And I said
Mm,
marginal. Doesn't have to
mm,
have a numeric value, doesn't have a monetary placement, doesn't even have to have a mental break. It's just
right.
that I'm doing something more than I did yesterday. So
Yes.
now, Tina, this is the hardest question for someone to answer, even though it sounds like it's going to be the easiest. What is your definition of success? And when did you feel the success?
Wow. That is hard because when you get into success, you also talk about ambition.
Yes.
And ambition can be different than success, although ambitious people want success. I think I always wanted to be seen, to be visible. I think that's partly because I'm a woman, and a lot of times women aren't visible. You know, they're not recognized, they're not seen, they're not picked in class. You know, you've got your hand up and nothing happens. But from my childhood trauma to wanting to belong and be seen, so be seen and belong. And those are also very much part of success. To be seen, to belong, to be known, to be valued by others. And I think, boy, it's such a tussle. I always have to be really honest with myself about it, that I've been very ambitious. And part of that ambition is the love of the work that I'm doing, but part of it is sort of the underlying trauma, and that desire to be seen and heard and acknowledged. Um, I think success is something that's very funny too, because sometimes you get to a place and you go, oh, I'm really pretty successful, but I'm not as successful as that person. And so there is a kind of a false measuring, or a measuring that one does. And I always say to my students and to other composers, those other successful people feel the same way, that maybe they could be a little bit more successful. You know, I'm, I'm vice president of the United States. I'm not president, sort of,
Right.
Um, so there's always, I think in the story of success, there's always self-doubt, and you have to kind of handle that self-doubt. And when do you feel that you've done enough, that you've achieved what you wanted? My bar when I started to compose, when I was leaving college and I was trying to decide, my mother, she was a full-time professor and teacher, and she had 5 children, but she really wanted to be a writer. And she didn't do that. And she was bitter. She was bitter about that. And I thought, if I don't choose to be a composer, I could, if I chose to be a composer, I could fail, not make any money. Nobody wants my music. But I think if I didn't do it, I would be bitter. And that was worse.
Okay, and I
And
like that. That was spiritual. Go ahead, keep going.
yeah, so boy, success is a very hard, complicated, messy subject. I wish, I could say, oh, I don't care about success. Success is, hugging my children. It is a kind of success, of course. Uh, but there is always this ambition that kind of percolates up. And as I get older, how do I measure my productivity? How is it different than it was before? What do I accept as being a working artist at my age now as when I was in my 30s and 40s? It's always a kind of push and pull.
Okay, yeah, a little tug and pull here and there. So I want to thank you for that. You did an amazing job on those 2020 questions. And that right there inside this show, and I always tell this to the audience, and I'll let you know this real quick. It is the part, like I love doing those questions because right there we got this wholehearted explanation out of you, and you had a semi smile when you came on here. But the more you got talking about success, I'm telling you, your smile went from a grin to a full on smile.
Yeah.
And I know that you can't see it because I can see it because we're both seeing each other on here. I want to tell you that I like that. Now, one thing that I do on this show, me and you talked for a moment. We had a quick little pre-call because I had to set up everything. And audience, when I say a pre-call, is just the beginning of before the episode starts. I don't actually call somebody to do the interview. I like to meet you like this and let it be an encounter, like we're inside a train station and we just started a conversation for no reason, and then it turned into what it did now. So here's my testimony of Tina of you, and this is Tina Davidson that I'm giving this testimony to. There's words that I always use: fortitude, tenacity, different things like that. We're not going to use that here. We're going to use perseverance. Perseverance is
Mm.
your title. That is your name inside the world. If someone wanted to dub you something, you are perseverance. What happened here is you told a story, an amazing story of a role reversal, not what we would think with the parent trap or the switch like that. It was a complete role reversal. So being able to come out of that without resentment, without a strong hatred in heart, because you could have came in the world and just been fueled by anger, and you could have made some strong compositions of just some, you could have just put a lot of drums or different things into your artistic views. You could have made your music like Fantasia, and I'm talking about the Disney portion, but you didn't. You decided to make periodic music in certain areas to help you grow and to help the world grow. And that's something that I appreciate. And that's something I want to give you your, I say
Mhm.
chops, but give you your flowers on that, because a lot of people will not tell you this. So I want to tell you thank you for that, because of your artistic views. Understand this: over all this time that you've been alive, your artistic views have probably helped someone not go off a ledge
Mm.
or stay on the other side of the ledge and be productive and continue what they're doing. So I want to tell you thank you for that. Now, onto the artistic direction. Being a content creator, because we used to say musicians and different stuff like that, but content creator is the
Mhm.
2020 term that we use now. Um, so being a content creator and being a musician and being in every facet of these decades. So basically, you reference 70s, 80s, 90s. You were in the 60s, but what I'm saying is 70s, 80s, 90s.
Absolutely.
And mind you, I've only was part of the 80s. I'm in 1985, so I was 80s, 90s to, and by the split of
Mhm.
2000, that's when the digital age came. So you come from a time when you can actually remember true imagination, true creativity that was not driven by an electronic influence.
Mm.
And not having that electronic influence is something that we can't preserve anymore. So I want to tell you
That's
thank you.
interesting. Yeah, that's
That,
a
that,
really interesting observation. Yeah.
and I want to tell you thank you for that, because this is a living record and a testimony. When me and you both were gone from here and we're nothing but parts of the ground again, that people will have, they can learn about you are actually, and I'm not saying this in a disrespectful way, but I'm telling you this in the most influential, in the most
Mm.
spiritual way I can say this. You are actually a walking piece of history right now, because understand this, you come from a time when the biggest entertainment would have been radio.
Well, what I said is about humming is there was such a shift when there was suddenly Walkmans. That was, where you had a little cassette tape on your arm and you were listening to music. And that was the first time that that music was between themselves. It wasn't, you could walk around and be with other people, but be in a music world. Before that, other people would have had to have heard what you were listening to because there was
Right.
no capability. And that was so extraordinary. And that shift where people stopped making their own music by singing or whistling. Oh my goodness. When I was a child, men in particular were very, very good whistlers, and they would whistle songs all the time. Um, and that stopped.
Right.
That
So
really has stopped.
so what I'm telling to you this about this in this testimony is that you are a true testament of time in knowing that you've seen the influence and the rise of technology. And just in 60 years, you can actually go back and see the difference. So that's something I admire because my mother is my mom's 66, so she grew up in an age where radio was big. Everybody had the radio was what the TV was, and then from the radio to the TV, and then from the TV to that little sheet that you used to put on your TV to make color, then from 8 track or from vinyl to 8 track to Betamax to all these other
Right.
different things. You've seen technology and how it's helped and how it's hindered and how it's made life complicated and how it's taken away a creative drive that you only had when you were around.
Yes. And I'm not going to say but, my stepdaughter, who is 30, has finally been reading my memoir, Let Your Heart Be Broken. And she called me up and she said, I just bought a journal. Because my book is so much about journaling. She said, I want to understand myself. Journaling is old school. It's really old school. It's taking a pen or a pencil and writing something which is slow, but it's writing something down. And I thought that was so interesting that what she got out of my book was, I want to know myself. Might be a really great way to do it. And I thought, oh, what a compliment. Talk about feeling successful. I was like going, whoa, that is
Right.
wonderful.
So to finish off the testament I have for you, I want to tell you thank you in the world, and I want you to every time you get up, look in the mirror, but look in the mirror from left to right, right to left, however you do, or stage right, stage left, however you do your movements in the mirror, and just remember that you are a walking piece of history of this, and hold on of this, a woman that came up in a time when you could be successful, but there were shackles on being successful,
Difficult.
difficult, and from that you didn't have to do one of those rising phoenix things. You just kept going and going. And now the fruition of everything that you did then is out here in the world and it's in this nice book. So on that note, I would like you to do this one last thing before we get off here from this show, because we have another show we're going to do real quick. I would like you to give a huge shout out or a big thank you to everybody or an entity that has helped you along the way. Because some people, some people have pet rocks, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like you to do that real quick if you don't mind, Tina.
Wow. Oh boy, the list is just so long. I mean, my teachers, I think maybe my piano teacher when I was in elementary and middle school, he was a bachelor, and he was very kind, but he gave me all this weird music. It wasn't always classical. It was some Brazilian music, some Latino music, some jazz. So he gave me this amazing, it wasn't like this small world of classical music. Of course, I played Bach and Beethoven, but it was also this other stuff that I didn't know anything about. And it always sparked my curiosity. I was like, ooh, I wonder what that is. So I'd give a shout out to him.
Okay, and I thank you for that. Now, on that note, audience, I will tell you this: in the show notes, there will be amazing things in there, things that we didn't talk about here. And the great thing about a show is this transcript goes into one of those AI things, and it'll make some amazing notes. And there will be a call to action where I will send you all to Tina Davidson's website, to places to get her book. And if we missed anything, she'll hopefully send me some nice information to add in there, or in case something new comes up before this episode comes out. And I want to thank you, Tina, for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
And on that note, I'm JR, and we are signing off.